The Apache girl feared cowboys would harm her, until one cowboy became her shield. She lived in a small village tucked between rolling hills and wide plains, a place where the wind carried stories of old battles, laughter, and sometimes sorrow. Her family's homes were made of sun-baked clay and wooden frames, sturdy enough to protect them from the hot sun and occasional storms, but fragile against the world outside. The village was alive with the sounds of daily life. Children's laughter as they ran barefoot across dusty paths, women humming soft songs while weaving baskets, and men tending to horses or preparing for hunting trips. Yet, even in this lively village, Nolly could feel a quiet tension, a lingering worry that the safety of her home was fragile and that danger could arrive at any moment. Stories of cowboys had reached the village long before Nolly had ever seen one. The elders spoke in low, serious voices about the men on horseback who sometimes came from the distant towns. They said these cowboys were unpredictable. Some were greedy, taking what they wanted from the land, while others were careless or violent. Even the thought of these outsiders made Nolly's heart beat faster, and she often imagined what could happen if they came too close. Every night, as her mother tucked her into her small bed of blankets, Nolly would whisper questions that her mother answered gently, trying to calm her fears. "Why do they come here?" Nolly would ask. "Do they want to hurt us?" Her mother would stroke her hair and say, "Most of them only pass through, little one. But always watch, always be careful. The world is full of kind people and a few who are not." Despite these reassurances, Nolly found it hard to believe. She had learned to notice the smallest signs of trouble, a broken branch, a sudden rustle in the bushes, or the distant sound of hooves. These details told her stories before words were spoken. She practiced moving quietly, crouching behind rocks or thick bushes whenever she felt uncertain. Sometimes she would hide behind the tall grass near the riverbank for hours, watching the horizon, imagining what a group of strangers on horseback might be planning. Fear was a constant companion, but it also sharpened her senses, making her alert and careful. It was as if her fear was a shadow that followed her everywhere, reminding her to survive, to protect herself, and to trust her instincts. The days were hot and bright, the kind of sunlight that made the earth shimmer and the river water sparkle like liquid silver. On one particular morning, Nolly was sent by her mother to fetch water from the river, a task she had done many times before. She balanced a clay pot on her hip and hummed a quiet tune to herself, letting the familiar rhythm calm her. As she walked through the narrow trail leading to the river, the soft crunch of sand beneath her feet was the only sound. Birds sang above her and a gentle breeze played with the edges of her shawl. Yet, even in this ordinary moment, a sense of unease crept over her. She paused, scanning the distance. The hills appeared calm, but in her heart she knew that danger could arrive suddenly. Her eyes searched the horizon, alert for movement, for shadows that did not belong. Then she saw them. A small group of men riding horses appeared at the top of the hill, their figures silhouetted against the bright sky. Nolly froze, her breath catching in her chest. Her instincts screamed that she should hide, that she should disappear into the rocks and bushes nearby. She had imagined this moment countless times before, yet now that it was real, it was more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. She pressed herself against a large rock, her back flat against the rough surface, and peered around it with wide, cautious eyes. The men seemed focused on something far below the hill, not noticing her at first. But Nolly's mind raced with possibilities. What if they were looking for her village? What if they had come to take something, or worse? She clutched the pot tighter, feeling its weight, as if it could somehow shield her from the danger she imagined. Minutes passed like hours. Nolly watched as the cowboys moved carefully down the slope. They spoke in low voices, words she could not understand, but the tones sounded harsh and commanding. Her heart pounded so loudly that she thought they might hear it. She thought of her family, her little brother who liked to chase chickens, and her mother, always worried and gentle. The thought of anyone harming them filled her with a deep, instinctive fear. Her legs trembled, but she did not move. She could not risk being seen. The rocks and tall grass were her only allies now, her shields against a world she did not fully understand. Then something unexpected happened. One of the men, riding slightly ahead of the others, seemed distracted by a small horse struggling near the riverbank. He dismounted carefully, speaking softly to the animal, calming it. Nolly's curiosity overcame some of her fear. She could see the gentleness in his movements, the patience in the way he handled the horse. It was unlike the rough, harsh energy she had imagined all cowboys possessed. Still, she stayed hidden, watching every gesture, her mind torn between fear and a strange sense of wonder. Could it be that not all outsiders were dangerous? The thought made her heartbeat slow slightly, though the fear still lingered at the edges of her mind. Suddenly, a loud noise startled the horse and it bolted, knocking Nolly off balance. She stumbled, and her water pot tipped dangerously. Without thinking, the man rushed toward her, steadying her with a firm but gentle hand. Nolly's eyes widened. The fear in her chest clashed with confusion and a flicker of trust. He did not speak harshly. He did not push her away or make a sudden movement. Instead, he helped her regain her balance and checked to see if she was hurt. For the first time, Nolly realized that one man among the strangers could be kind, careful, and protective. Her heart was still wary, but the fear that had gripped her moments ago began to soften, replaced by a cautious curiosity. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice calm and respectful. Nolly nodded, too surprised to speak at first. She could see the concern in his eyes, and it made her wonder why someone like him would even care. He introduced himself as Luke, though Nolly did not know if she could trust names yet. She watched as he handled the horse, careful not to frighten it further. There was a patience and a gentleness in his actions that she had never seen in the stories of cowboys told by her elders. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps there were people in the outside world who did not wish her harm. Even as she returned to the village that day, Nolly could not stop thinking about Luke. She replayed every moment, every gesture, every word, trying to understand him. Her fear was still there, like a shadow in the back of her mind, but it had changed. It was no longer blind terror. It had become cautious awareness. She knew that the world beyond the village could be dangerous, but she also realized that not all strangers were enemies. That day, Nolly learned an important lesson. Fear could protect her, but it could also limit her understanding of the world. Trust, even when cautious, could reveal unexpected kindness. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nolly was back in her home, helping her mother with the evening chores. Her hands were wet from washing dishes, but her mind was busy with thoughts of the cowboys, especially Luke. She wondered if she would see him again, if he would come near the village, or if he would disappear like a fleeting shadow. Her mother noticed her distant gaze and asked what was on her mind. Nolly smiled faintly, a small, secret smile, and said only, "I saw someone today, someone different." Her mother nodded knowingly, sensing that her daughter had experienced something that could change the way she viewed the world outside their village. That night, as Nolly lay under her blankets, listening to the soft wind rustling through the trees, she thought about the lessons of the day. The fear that had gripped her was real, but it had not overwhelmed her. She had survived, observed, and learned. And she had seen a glimpse of something unexpected, compassion from a stranger. It was a tiny spark of hope, but in a world that often seemed harsh and unkind, even a small spark could make a difference. With that thought, Nolly closed her eyes, feeling both the weight of caution and the lightness of curiosity, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Nolly awoke to the soft, golden light of dawn spilling across her village. The world felt calm, yet her mind was restless. Her encounter with the cowboy lingered in her thoughts like a shadow she could not shake. Luke's presence, brief as it had been, had left a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and cautious hope in her heart. She wondered why he had helped her, why he had been gentle with the horse, and why his eyes had seemed to care about more than just himself. For the first time, she questioned the stories she had heard about cowboys. Could it be that some of them were not cruel or dangerous? That thought both comforted and confused her. She moved quietly around her home, helping her mother with small chores while stealing glances at the horizon. The hills beyond the village seemed ordinary, yet they now held the possibility of danger, or perhaps of discovery. Her mother noticed her unusual silence. "Are you thinking about yesterday, Nolly?" she asked gently. Nolly nodded, uncertain how to explain the mixture of fear and fascination she felt. Her mother smiled softly, as if she understood perfectly. "It is natural to be cautious, child, but the world is more complex than our fears. Sometimes, even strangers can teach us lessons." Nolly listened carefully, pondering the meaning of her mother's words. As the day progressed, Nolly found herself wandering near the edge of the village. She wanted to see the place where the cowboys had appeared, hoping for another glimpse of the man who had saved her. She crouched behind a clump of bushes and watched the hills, her eyes scanning every movement. Hours passed, and her heart jumped at every distant sound. Then in the distance she saw him, Luke. He was riding slowly, carrying a small bundle of supplies. Nolly's breath caught in her throat. He seemed different in the sunlight, calmer and gentler, his movements careful, almost respectful of the land. She noticed how he helped a struggling bird caught in some thorny bushes, carefully freeing it without hurting the branches or the creature. For Nolly, every small action spoke volumes. She had always believed that cowboys were reckless and dangerous, but Luke's behavior suggested something else entirely. He observed, helped, and respected not only the people he encountered, but also the animals and the land itself. Her fear was still present, whispering that she must hide, that she could not fully trust him. Yet she could not deny the growing curiosity inside her. Carefully, she decided to watch him from a distance, hoping to learn more about the man behind the horse. Days turned into weeks, and Luke continued to appear near the outskirts of the village. Always at a distance, he never approached the homes directly, never interrupted the routines of the villagers, and never tried to speak to anyone other than observing from afar. Nolly began to notice patterns in his behavior. He would ride along the riverbanks, checking the animals and the land. Occasionally, he would leave small gifts, a bundle of dried herbs, a repaired basket, or a few pieces of food, always leaving them where they could be found without causing alarm. At first, the villagers were suspicious. Some whispered that he might be spying or planning something harmful, but gradually, even the elders began to see that his intentions seemed different from the cowboys they had feared. Nolly watched all of this with a mixture of fascination and growing trust. She began to notice that Luke had a quiet bravery. Once, she saw a wild horse trapped in a thorny bush. Other cowboys might have forced it to move or left it to struggle. Luke, however, carefully worked to free the horse, using patience and skill, never rushing or causing harm. Nolly realized that his courage was not loud or aggressive but calm and deliberate. He respected life, both human and animal, and in that she found a sense of safety she had never felt before. One afternoon, while Nolly gathered berries near the river, she saw Luke again. This time he approached an injured deer caught in the shallow water. She held her breath as he knelt beside the animal, carefully untangling it from the reeds. He spoke softly, as if comforting the deer, and gently guided it back to the riverbank. Nolly's heart swelled. Here was a man who could face danger and pain, yet remain kind and patient. The fear she had carried for so long began to shift into something new, a cautious admiration, a tentative hope that perhaps there were people in the world she could trust. The villagers slowly began to accept Luke's presence. One evening, during a council meeting of the elders, they discussed a group of cowboys who had been taking livestock from nearby lands. The elders were worried and debated how to protect the village without causing conflict. To everyone's surprise, Luke appeared at the edge of the meeting, raising his hand in greeting. He spoke calmly, explaining that he had noticed the trouble and had ideas to prevent it from reaching the village. His knowledge of the land and the surrounding area impressed the elders, and they began to see him not as a threat but as an ally. Nolly listened from the back, amazed. The man she had feared for so long was becoming a protector, someone who could act where others might fail. One morning, while walking along the river, Nolly finally decided to approach Luke. She stepped out from behind the bushes, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. Luke turned and smiled gently, his eyes calm and reassuring. "Good morning," he said softly. "I didn't mean to frighten you, I just want to help." Nolly hesitated, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Slowly, she nodded. He handed her a small basket of fresh herbs he had collected, carefully arranged so they would not spill. It was a small gesture, but for Nolly it spoke volumes. He was thinking of her safety, and of the well-being of the village. Over the next few weeks, Nolly began to learn more about Luke. He shared stories of the places he had traveled, of the animals he had cared for, and of the lessons he had learned from people he had met along the way. He never boasted, never demanded attention, and never acted as if he were superior. Instead, he listened to the villagers' stories, observed their customs, and respected their boundaries. Nolly began to see that courage was not only about strength or weapons but about patience, understanding, and the willingness to act with care when it mattered most. One day, a small conflict arose near the grazing lands. A group of cowboys from a nearby town had accidentally wandered too close and began to harass the livestock. The villagers were tense, unsure how to handle the situation. Luke quietly rode to the edge of the scene, and without raising his voice or showing aggression, intervened. He spoke with authority and calmness, guiding the cowboys away without violence. The villagers watched in awe, realizing that Luke's bravery was different from what they had imagined. He could face danger, yet do so with wisdom and respect. Nolly felt a surge of pride and relief. She was beginning to understand that not all outsiders were threats and that trust, when earned carefully, could create safety. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection for Nolly. She would sit by the river, watching the sunset, and think about the lessons of the day. Luke's presence had changed her perspective. Fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. She had learned to observe carefully, to judge actions rather than words, and to understand that kindness and courage could exist in unexpected forms. She realized that her world was larger than the boundaries of her village, and that even in a world filled with danger, there were people willing to protect, help, and respect others. By the end of the part, Nolly had begun to see Luke as more than a stranger. He was someone who could bridge the gap between fear and trust, someone who could show that bravery and gentleness could coexist. The village was slowly opening up to the idea, and Nolly felt a growing sense of hope. For the first time, she imagined a future where not all outsiders were to be feared, where courage could come in quiet gestures, and where friendships could form in the most unexpected ways. She knew the journey ahead would have challenges, but with Luke's presence nearby, she felt that the village and she herself might find safety, understanding, and a new sense of possibility. Days passed, and the village continued its routine, with children playing along the dusty paths, women weaving and preparing food, and men tending to the animals. Yet beneath the calm surface, a sense of caution lingered. The villagers were still wary of outsiders, especially cowboys, but Luke's presence had started to create a small change. People began to notice that he was different, quiet, respectful, and careful. He did not push boundaries, he did not speak harshly, and he never interfered unless it was necessary. Slowly, He was earning the attention and curiosity of those who had once been suspicious of all outsiders. Nolly, in particular, felt a growing sense of fascination. She found herself watching him from a distance, observing the way he moved, the way he interacted with the land, and the way he seemed to understand the delicate balance of life in the village. One morning, she spotted him helping an old woman collect firewood. He lifted heavy bundles of sticks without complaint, carefully placing them where the woman could reach them. Nolly's heart warmed at the sight. Here was a man who respected the people around him, who used strength only when needed, and who seemed to care without asking for anything in return. At first, Nolly kept her distance, afraid that approaching him might break the fragile trust she had begun to feel. But curiosity and hope slowly pushed her forward. One day, she decided to speak to him from the edge of the river, where she often collected water. "Why do you help us?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke turned to her, smiling gently, his eyes calm and kind. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "I do not wish harm to your village. I only want to help where I can." Nolly studied his face, searching for signs of deceit. There were none. His words were honest, his tone steady. She felt a small, cautious spark of trust grow inside her. Over the next few weeks, Nolly began spending more time near Luke, though always cautiously. She observed him as he rode along the hills, checking the grazing lands and making sure the animals were safe. Sometimes, he would pause to adjust a fence or clear debris from a path, always leaving the land undisturbed and safe. Nolly realized that he was not there to take anything from her village, but rather to protect it in small, careful ways. The villagers slowly noticed his efforts, and whispers of approval began to spread. Even the elders, who had once been suspicious of any cowboy, acknowledged that Luke's actions were honorable. One afternoon, Nolly saw Luke helping a young boy untangle a rope that had wrapped around his goat. The boy's mother watched anxiously, fearing that the animal might be injured. Luke spoke softly, guiding the boy's hands and showing him how to free the goat without hurting it. Nolly watched from a distance, her heart swelling with admiration. Here was a man who understood kindness, who used his knowledge and patience to protect and teach, rather than to dominate or frighten. Slowly, her fear of him began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of respect and a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, the world beyond the village was not entirely dangerous. The bond between Nolly and Luke grew quietly but steadily. She began to trust him enough to ask questions about the land, the animals, and the outside world. Luke spoke with patience, never rushing or speaking down to her. He told stories of distant plains, of rivers and mountains, of animals he had cared for, and of people he had met along the way. His stories were filled with lessons about bravery, patience, and understanding. Nolly listened intently, absorbing each word. She began to see that bravery was not about fighting or scaring others, but about protecting, helping, and acting with care when it mattered most. One morning, a small but tense situation arose near the grazing lands. A few cowboys from a neighboring town had wandered too close, disturbing the livestock and causing fear among the villagers. Nolly watched anxiously from the hills, her heart racing. She could see Luke approach them calmly, speaking in a firm but respectful voice. The strangers seemed uncertain, intimidated not by weapons or anger, but by Luke's calm confidence and the quiet authority he carried. Slowly, they retreated, leaving the grazing lands undisturbed. The villagers, who had been watching from a distance, began to murmur in approval. Luke's actions had prevented conflict without violence, showing that courage could be quiet, deliberate, and wise. This incident deepened Nolly's trust in him. She realized that he was not just a stranger who had helped her once. He was someone who could protect her and the village when danger came. She began to follow him more closely, learning from his actions, observing how he treated the land and the animals, and understanding the subtle ways he maintained peace. She began to feel a sense of safety she had never experienced before, a feeling that perhaps there were people in the world who could be trusted, even outside the village. Luke also noticed Nolly's curiosity and intelligence. He began to include her in small tasks, teaching her how to observe the land, care for the animals, and anticipate danger. He never spoke down to her, never treated her as a child who could not understand. Instead, he guided her gently, answering her questions and encouraging her to think and act for herself. Nolly felt proud of herself for learning, and she began to see her own strength and courage grow alongside her trust in him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Nolly and Luke walked along the riverbank. She carried a small basket of herbs she had gathered, and he carried a few supplies for the village. They spoke quietly, sharing stories of the day, of the animals, and of the small lessons they had learned. The world seemed calm and safe in that moment, yet Nolly knew that danger could still come at any time. But with Luke nearby, she felt a sense of confidence and calm she had never known before. She realized that trust and courage could exist together, that fear could be balanced with hope, and that kindness could protect just as effectively as strength. The villagers began to notice the bond forming between Nolly and Luke. They saw how she began to walk more confidently near the hills, how she observed the land with growing awareness, and how she spoke of the outside world with curiosity rather than fear. They also saw Luke's patience and care, and slowly, even the most cautious elders began to respect him. Some whispered to each other that perhaps the village had found a protector in the most unexpected form, a cowboy who had once been feared, but now served as a bridge between worlds. Nolly's own understanding of fear and courage deepened during this time. She realized that her fear of outsiders had been both a shield and a barrier. It had protected her, but it had also limited her understanding. Luke showed her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act thoughtfully and kindly despite it. He showed her that trust was not something given blindly, but something earned through actions and patience. And slowly, Nolly began to see the world not as a place filled only with danger, but as a place where bravery, kindness, and respect could create safety and hope. One day, while helping Luke repair a small fence near the grazing lands, Nolly noticed a group of young children from the village playing nearby. She realized that her own actions could now serve as an example. Just as Luke had taught her about patience, observation, and courage, she could begin to share those lessons with the younger children. She began to feel a sense of responsibility, a desire to protect and teach, just as Luke had protected and guided her. The bond between them had grown beyond fear or curiosity. It had become a partnership of learning, trust, and quiet courage. By the end of this period, Nolly's world had shifted in subtle but important ways. She no longer saw the hills and plains as places only of danger. She saw them as spaces where life and learning could coexist, where protection and kindness could emerge in unexpected forms. She understood that courage could take many forms, from the quiet bravery of Luke confronting outsiders without anger, to the patience and care he showed for the land and animals, to her own growing confidence in observing, learning, and acting wisely. The story of trust and growing friendship between Nolly and Luke was still unfolding, but already the village had begun to see a new possibility. Fear could be tempered with hope. Danger could be met with careful courage. And even the most unlikely bonds, between an Apache girl and a cowboy, could teach lessons about kindness, patience, and understanding that would shape the future of both the village and the people within it. The village had grown used to a quiet rhythm, a pattern of daily life. Where children played safely, animals roamed the grazing lands, and elders watched over the younger generations. Yet beneath the calm, a tension began to stir, one that no one could ignore. Rumors spread of a group of cowboys from a distant town who had been acting aggressively near other settlements. They were said to be careless with animals, greedy for resources, and quick to anger. The villagers whispered among themselves, fearing that the trouble could reach their peaceful home. For Nolly, who had learned to sense danger in the smallest details, the rustle of the wind through the grass, the sudden stamp of hooves, the way a shadow moved across the hills, this news set her heart racing. Luke, always alert but calm, rode along the village perimeter each morning, observing the land and the horizon with careful eyes. Nolly walked beside him, carrying a small basket of herbs she had gathered, her senses heightened by the warnings she had heard. She noticed the furrow in Luke's brow, the way he scanned the hills, the careful placement of each step he took. He spoke quietly, explaining that they could not let fear control them, but they also could not ignore the threat. "Caution is our friend," he said. "We act with care, but we must be ready to protect what matters." His words gave Nolly both reassurance and determination. She felt the weight of responsibility settle on her young shoulders, but with Luke beside her, it felt lighter, manageable, even possible. The day began like any other. Villagers tended their chores, children ran along the paths chasing each other with laughter, and elders kept a watchful eye on the grazing animals. But by mid-morning, a distant sound broke the peaceful rhythm, a thunder of hooves and the occasional shout carried by the wind. Nolly's heart froze. She recognized the sound of approaching horses, heavy and fast, moving closer to the village. She looked toward the hills and saw the figures of men riding recklessly, their movements careless and unpredictable. Fear gripped her, but this time it was not blind fear. She remembered Luke's lessons, the ways he had taught her to observe, to act thoughtfully, and to protect without panic. Luke saw the intruders from a distance as well. His posture stiffened, and he quickly assessed the situation. The men were moving toward the village with force, not with curiosity but with intent to disturb the peace and take what they wanted. Luke's calm voice broke the tension for Nolly. "Stay close and do exactly as I say," he instructed. She nodded, her hands gripping the basket tightly, her eyes wide but steady. Luke signaled for her to stay behind the rocks near the edge of the riverbank, a spot where she could observe without being in danger. Her heart pounded as she watched him prepare to face the intruders. When the cowboys entered the grazing lands, their horses kicking up dust, the villagers' panic began to rise. Livestock scattered, children ran to the safety of their homes, and elders tried to maintain order. But Luke stepped forward, riding calmly between the intruders and the village. He did not raise his voice angrily, nor did he brandish any weapon threateningly. Instead, he spoke with authority and quiet confidence, commanding attention without causing fear. "This land is protected," he said firmly. "You cannot take what does not belong to you. Leave peacefully and no one will be harmed." The intruders hesitated, surprised by the strength and calm of Luke's demeanor. They expected fear, chaos, or confrontation, but not this steady, deliberate courage. Luke continued, guiding them back toward the open plains, using words, gestures, and the careful presence of his horse to direct their movements. Nolly watched from behind the rocks, her breath catching as the situation unfolded. She felt her heart swell with admiration and relief. Here was a man who could face danger without panic, who could protect her home and the village with courage and wisdom. One of the cowboys, more aggressive than the others, tried to push back, moving toward the livestock with force. Luke did not hesitate. He positioned his horse between the intruder and the animals, using his calm authority to prevent harm. He spoke firmly, clearly, and without anger. "You will not take them," he said. The man hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Luke's presence alone was enough to create a boundary the intruder could not cross. Slowly the group retreated, leaving the grazing lands and the village untouched. When the danger had passed, Luke returned to where Nolly was waiting. She ran toward him, relief washing over her in waves. You saved everyone," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of awe. Luke smiled gently, patting her shoulder. "We did it together," he said. "You stayed calm, observed carefully, and trusted your instincts. That is courage, Nolly." "Never forget that," she nodded, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. For the first time, she realized that bravery was not just about strength, but about thoughtful action, trust, and protection. The villagers, who had been watching from a distance, began to gather around. Their fear had been strong, but now relief and respect replaced it. They saw Luke not as an outsider, not as a threat, but as a protector who had acted with wisdom and care. Murmurs of approval and gratitude spread through the crowd. Even the elders, who had long been cautious of all cowboys, acknowledged that his actions had prevented disaster without violence. Nolly felt a swell of pride, not just in Luke but in herself. She had watched, learned, and trusted, and that trust had been justified. Over the following days, the village slowly returned to its routine, but the events left a lasting impression on everyone. Children spoke in hushed tones about the bravery they had witnessed, women shared stories of calm courage, and elders reflected on the lessons learned. For Nolly, the experience was transformative. She had faced real fear, observed true bravery, and learned that protection could come from unexpected sources. She understood that trust, once carefully earned, could create safety even in the most dangerous moments. Luke continued his quiet vigilance, but now the villagers' acceptance of him was stronger than ever. He helped repair fences, guided the animals safely, and remained attentive to the horizon, always ready to act if danger returned. Nolly followed his example, practicing careful observation, thoughtful action, and patient courage. Together, they formed a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Nolly and Luke walked along the riverbank. The air was calm, and the village seemed peaceful once more. Nolly carried a small basket of herbs, while Luke adjusted his horse's reins, keeping watch over the land. She turned to him and said softly, "I used to be so afraid of people like you. But now I feel safe because you showed me how to be brave and careful." Luke smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "Fear is not wrong," he said. "It keeps us alert. But courage is what we do with that fear. You have learned well, Nolly. You are brave and you are careful. That is why we succeeded." The test of loyalty and courage had not been easy. The danger had been real and the stakes high. Yet through it all, Luke had shown that protection did not always come from strength alone, but from wisdom, patience, and deliberate action. He had become a shield not just for Nolly, but for the entire village, proving that courage and kindness could coexist in ways that inspired trust and hope. By the end of this period, Nolly's understanding of the world had grown profoundly. She knew that fear would always exist, but she also knew that thoughtful courage could overcome it. She saw Luke not just as a protector, but as a teacher, a guide, and a friend. The villagers, too, had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that even the most unlikely individuals could rise to meet danger with integrity and care. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle over the village, Nolly lay in her blankets, reflecting on the events of the day. She felt a quiet confidence she had never known before. She knew that challenges would continue to come, that the plains could still hold danger, and that cowboys or strangers might return. But she also knew that courage, trust, and careful action could face those challenges. And above all, she felt a deep gratitude for the man who had become her shield, a figure who had transformed fear into safety and uncertainty into hope. After the tense events that had tested the village, life slowly returned to a peaceful rhythm. The grazing lands were calm, the children played without fear, and the elders tended their responsibilities with cautious relief. Yet beneath the surface, a sense of change had settled in. The villagers had learned that danger could be met with careful courage, that fear could be balanced with wisdom, and that not all outsiders were enemies. Luke's presence had become a steadying force, and Nolly's perception of the world had shifted in ways she could feel deep in her heart. For Nolly, mornings began with a quiet excitement. She rose early, helping her mother with chores, but her mind often wandered to the lands beyond the village, to the hills, and to the riverbank where Luke often worked. She remembered the fear that had once gripped her heart, the fear of cowboys, of strangers, of the unknown. But now that fear was tempered by trust and understanding. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with care despite it. And Luke had taught her that protection could take many forms, through words, through patience, and through deliberate, thoughtful action. Luke continued his quiet vigilance around the village. He repaired fences, guided the animals, and remained alert to the horizon, ready to respond if danger returned. Yet, his presence was no longer one of uncertainty or suspicion. The villagers had begun to rely on him, to see him as a true ally. Children would sometimes watch him from a distance, fascinated by his skill with horses and his gentle interactions with the animals. Women would nod politely as he passed, grateful for the ways he had kept the village safe. Even the elders, who had once been wary of all outsiders, acknowledged his bravery, wisdom, and respect for their customs. Nolly's bond with Luke grew stronger with each passing day. She began accompanying him more often, observing how he approached problems, how he treated the land, and how he balanced caution with action. She carried baskets of herbs, helped guide the animals, and learned the subtle ways of observation that Luke had taught her. He never treated her as a child incapable of understanding. Instead, he guided her with patience and respect. She felt a sense of pride in her growing skills, in her ability to learn and act wisely, and in the trust she had earned from both Luke and the village. One afternoon, while walking along the riverbank, Luke stopped and looked at her seriously. "Nolly," he said softly, "you have grown brave and wise. The courage you showed during the danger that came to the village, it was not only my guidance. You acted, observed, and helped in ways that kept everyone safe. Never forget that courage comes from knowledge, awareness, and careful action, not just from strength." Nolly nodded, her chest swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. She realized that she had learned more than just survival. She had learned responsibility, understanding, and the quiet power of thoughtful courage. The villagers soon began to notice another change in Nolly. She walked with a quiet confidence, no longer shrinking at the sight of distant strangers or the unknown lands beyond the village. She helped guide the younger children in observing the animals, taught them small lessons she had learned from Luke, and shared her knowledge of the river, the grazing lands, and the ways of the world around them. The children looked up to her, and the elders noticed the maturity in her actions. She had become not only brave but wise beyond her years, a young girl shaped by both fear and careful guidance. One day, while repairing a fence near the grazing lands, Luke noticed a small group of children attempting to move livestock without knowing the proper method. Nolly stepped forward, confidently guiding the children, explaining how to approach the animals calmly and safely. Luke watched silently, impressed by her composure and skill. She had absorbed his lessons fully, not just in knowledge but in practice. "You have grown strong in more ways than I imagined," he said quietly, a proud smile crossing his face. Nolly smiled back, feeling a warmth that was both personal and connected to the village she loved. As the seasons changed, the bond between Nolly and Luke grew into a unique friendship built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. They would often walk together along the river, collecting herbs, checking fences, or observing the wildlife. They spoke of the world beyond the village, of distant lands and animals, of people they had met or heard about. Luke shared lessons about patience, bravery, and understanding, while Nolly shared stories from her family and village life. Their friendship was not loud or dramatic, but steady and deep, like the river that flowed near the village, calm, persistent, and life-giving. The village itself had begun to flourish in subtle ways. Livestock roamed safely, crops were carefully tended, and the children learned not just the ways of survival but the lessons of observation, respect, and courage. Elders and adults alike had begun to see that the lessons Luke taught Nolly were valuable for the community as a whole. They began to incorporate his guidance into their routines, creating a safer, wiser, and more connected village. Nolly's growth became an example of what could happen when fear was met with careful courage, and when trust was given thoughtfully but not blindly. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a brilliant shade of orange and pink, Nolly sat by the riverbank with Luke. The air was calm and the village seemed peaceful under the soft glow of twilight. She carried a small basket of herbs, while he adjusted the reins on his horse, keeping watch over the grazing lands. She turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "I used to be so afraid," she said. "Of cowboys, of strangers, of what might happen. But now I feel safe. Not because the danger is gone, but because I understand how to act, and because you showed me how to be brave in careful ways." Luke smiled, a warmth in his eyes that reflected pride and respect. "Fear is never wrong," he said gently. "It keeps us alert. But bravery is what we do with that fear. You have learned well, Nolly. You are brave, you are careful, and you are wise. That is the truest courage of all." Nolly felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for Luke's guidance but for the lessons of the past months, the moments of fear, the tests of patience, and the opportunities to act with awareness and care. The bond between them was no longer just teacher and student, protector and protected. It had grown into a friendship built on shared experiences, respect, and trust. They understood each other without words at times, knew when to act and when to wait, and could navigate challenges together with patience and courage. Nolly felt a sense of confidence she had never known, a belief that even in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable, she could act wisely, protect those she cared about, and find allies in unexpected places. The village continued to thrive, shaped subtly by the lessons learned during the dangers that had tested them. The grazing lands were peaceful, the livestock safe, and the children learning not only survival skills but lessons of observation, patience, and understanding. Elders reflected on the changes, realizing that even a single act of courage and kindness, Luke's calm intervention, had ripple effects that transformed the community. Nolly's growth became a symbol of what careful courage and trust could achieve. As the nights passed, Nolly often lay under the stars, thinking about the journey she had taken. She remembered the fear that had gripped her when she first saw Luke and the other cowboys. She remembered the small moments of kindness, the careful lessons, and the growing trust. She realized that fear had not disappeared, but it had been transformed. It was now a guide, not a barrier, a reminder to act thoughtfully, to observe carefully, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. Luke, too, reflected on the journey. He had come to the village as a stranger, cautious and curious, and had slowly earned a place in the hearts of the villagers. But the greatest reward, he realized, was the bond he had formed with Nolly. She was brave, intelligent, and capable, and he had seen her grow into a confident young girl who could face challenges with wisdom and courage. Their friendship was a bridge between worlds, the world of the village and the world beyond the hills, and it had created a space where understanding, protection, and respect could thrive. The story of Nolly and Luke became quietly known throughout the village. Children spoke of the cowboy who had once been feared but had shown patience and courage. Elders reflected on the lessons of observation, careful action, and trust. And Nolly herself walked through her home, the grazing lands, and the riverbank with a sense of calm confidence. She had learned that courage could take many forms, that trust must be earned and respected, and that even the most unlikely bonds could create safety, understanding, and hope. As the sun rose each day over the village, Nolly felt a new sense of possibility. She could face the unknown with confidence, knowing that fear was not weakness but guidance. She could act with patience, observation, and wisdom, understanding that bravery was not loud or aggressive, but deliberate and careful. And she could trust that kindness and courage could coexist, even in a world that often seemed harsh or unpredictable. By the time the seasons changed, the bond between Nolly and Luke had become a steady force in the village. He was no longer just a protector but a trusted friend, a guide, and a living example of courage and care. And Nolly, once a fearful girl, had grown into a young girl of quiet strength, confidence, and understanding. Together they had faced fear, acted with wisdom, and shown that trust, respect, and bravery could create safety, hope, and a brighter future for all.